Hey, welcome. The internet is just packed with these dark corners and really unsettling mysteries. They feel like modern ghost stories, right? Just told through our glowing screens. But some of them, the ones that really get under your skin, they don't stay unsolved forever. Today, we're cracking open the case files on some of the web's creepiest legends to find out what was really going on. So, what actually happens when the digital ghosts are finally unmasked? When those phantom signals get traced and the cryptic messages are at last deciphered? Well, it turns out the answers are often way more surprising and way more human than you might think. Let's dive in. So, here's the roadmap for today. First up, we're going to look into what seemed to be a murder scene discovered on 4chan. Then, we'll tune into a bizarre radio signal that was haunting Portland. After that, we'll uncover the really tragic story behind a Reddit user's strange breakdown, and finally, we'll get into a secret game and ask if it was actually a recruitment tool for a cult. And definitely stick around because we're going to tie this all together at the end. Okay, let's kick things off with a story that feels like it was ripped straight out of a horror movie. This was back in 2013, and a post on 4chan's paranormal board kicked off this absolutely terrifying live investigation that had the whole community just glued to their screens. So this is the message that pops up from a user named TQ8. It came with coordinates to some abandoned industrial area out in Tennessee. At first, people probably thought it was just your standard internet creepypasta. But then, TQ8 posted photos. One looked chillingly like a dead body. Another showed rubble inside this warehouse. The poster even called the body his friend and said the prize was hidden under some plastic. The wild part? The images were totally unique, they had never been seen online before, and they looked terrifyingly real. So, for 5 whole days, the thread just sits there, simmering. Then, a new user named Alex shows up and says he's going to the coordinates, and he starts posting photos, right from his phone, live updating his whole journey. He's describing a dirt basement with tunnels dug into the walls, scrap metal, piles of junk everywhere. Then the updates get scarier. He says he hears noises like a car on the gravel above him. He finds a plastic bag with animal bones and pill bottles. And his final message was just frantic. He was turning around and running back through a wood door. And then, radio silence. He was just gone, never posted it again. So for years, this whole thing becomes this legendary internet ghost story. Did Alex meet the same end as the person in that horrible photo? The mystery seemed impossible to solve. That is until one investigator had this genius idea. They brought in a forensic linguist. This expert just dug in, analyzing posts from the original poster, TQ8, and the explorer, Alex, putting their writing styles right next to each other to see what they could find. And what they found, well, it was a total bombshell. The expert realized that both writers used the exact same weird sentence structures, the same strange punctuation, the same specific words. Their writing was so similar, it was almost a perfect match. It was highly likely they were the same person and probably writing from a computer, not a phone in a scary warehouse. The whole thing, the body, the brave explorer, the sudden vanishing act, it was almost definitely a giant, elaborate hoax. A digital campfire story made up by one person playing 2 parts, all just to create an internet legend. Okay, so let's shift gears from a straight-up horror story to something a little more atmospheric. But trust me, it's just as bizarre. Between 2017 and 2018, folks in Portland, Oregon, started picking up a very strange signal on their FM radios. Yeah, so if you tuned in to 96.7 FM, you never knew what you were going to get. Some days, it was just these deep, thumping bass tones over and over. Other times, just hours of static. But then, it got even weirder. People started hearing these chopped-up speeches from Martin Luther King Jr. and JFK, mixed with these eerie sounds. Some people swore they even heard old Apollo mission audio and NASA launch commentary just buried in the mix. It was totally random, kind of creepy, and nobody had a clue where it was coming from. Naturally, the internet sleuths got right on it. They heard the station identify itself as KZRY LP Portland, and FCC records pointed to a nonprofit called the Community Alliance of Tenants, or CAT, which fights for housing justice. Which only made things weirder. Why would a tenant rights group be broadcasting this stuff? So when an investigator reaches out, they get this super short, almost bizarrely casual reply back. Someone named Katrina just confirms it's their station and says they're unaware of any interference. And that was it. No, oh my gosh, no questions, nothing. So it felt like they were hiding something, right?
But the real answer wasn't some huge conspiracy. It was actually a pretty common practice in the world of low-power FM radio. It's a technique called stunting. Basically, you broadcast weird, attention-grabbing stuff to get people talking right before you launch a new format or make a big change.
And that seems to be exactly what was going on here. After a little more digging, it turned out that Ket had just announced a partnership with another creative Portland station, X-Ray, which was known for doing experimental radio. So the bottom line is, the phantom signal wasn't a message from another dimension. It was just a really clever, if a little unsettling, marketing tactic. It was designed to make everyone ask, what in the world is going on with 96.7 right before the big reveal?
All right, our next case starts out as one of those truly bizarre internet moments. Something everyone just wrote off as a glitchy bot. But the truth? Wow. The truth turned out to be so much more tragic and so deeply human.
So this happened in 2010 on a Reddit thread about video games. A user named Yay Video Games just starts spamming the chat over and over, literally thousands of times, posting variations of this one nonsensical phrase. The words were kind of related to a real gaming controversy, Ubisoft's copy protection, or DRM, but the grammar was just a total mess. I mean, the whole thread was just flooded. The account gets banned, and for years, this is just one of those classic, weird internet moments.
Except it wasn't a bot. And it definitely wasn't a joke. Years later, a really dedicated Redditor decided to dig deep, using old archives to trace the user's online footprint. And what they uncovered completely flipped the story from a funny internet glitch to this just incredibly tragic story of a person in a very, very dark place. What the investigation pieced together was that Yay Video Games was just one of many accounts run by this one person in Australia. And by looking at his other posts, this heartbreaking picture started to form. He suffered from chronic pain and fatigue syndrome, which he said had basically stolen 6 years of his life. He was taking these massive doses of painkillers, up to 2,200 milligrams of codeine a day. He hadn't slept properly in a decade because of restless legs. And on top of all that, his background as a former Jehovah's Witness meant he'd grown up believing demons were real, and he even described a terrifying hallucination he once had. The spam wasn't random at all. It was the digital echo of a man just completely overwhelmed by illness, medication, pain, and sleep deprivation, stuck in a loop, typing out a phrase he probably couldn't even control.
For our last case, we're going to dive into one that's, well, it's kind of solved, but still leaves you with a ton of questions. It starts with a pretty silly indie RPG about Kanye West and ends with wondering if it was all just a really elaborate recruitment tool for a real-life cult.
Okay, so there's this indie game called Kanye Quest 3030, and on the surface, it's exactly what it sounds like, a total joke. But one player found something incredible. If you type the word ascend into one specific text box, the entire game just transforms. The music gets super unsettling, the screen turns black and white, and you're told the game is just a front for a thought exercise. You have to find your way through this creepy maze, solving password-locked rooms, and if you make it to the very end, a computer gives you this strange offer for further ascension, saying that if you agree, they'll interact with you and your possessions for 2 weeks and wait for your instructions. Now, this is where it gets really wild. This secret game wasn't just a one-off thing. The passwords and the symbols inside it all connected to this wider online network called Ascensionism. We're talking a record label, social media accounts, strange websites, all using the same symbols. And when investigators looked up who owned these sites, they all pointed back to one single name, a guy named Nick Lyons. So you have to ask, right? Was this just some massive, weird art project, or was it something more? Well, the proof came from a second related game called Calypso. Buried inside that game was a voicemail system with actual recordings from an Ascension hotline. These were recordings of real people calling a hotline, giving their names and their phone numbers, and asking to be contacted. This proved that whatever this project was trying to do, it was working. It was drawing people in who genuinely wanted to join. And then, just as mysteriously as it all appeared, the Ascensionism websites all got shut down around the same time, like the whole project was deliberately wrapped up. So we have an answer, but it's fuzzy. Kanye Quest wasn't just a joke. It was this complicated gateway. But was it a gateway to a massive art project or to a real recruitment effort for some kind of belief system? That's the final piece of the puzzle that's still missing. So we've walked through a wild hoax, a clever marketing campaign, a medical crisis, and a really strange art project. So what does all this actually tell us? What's the common thread here? When you really pull back the curtain on these digital ghost stories, you don't find aliens or secret government conspiracies. You find people. The source of all that strangeness was a desire to create a legend, a clever way to build buzz, a moment of deep personal suffering.
and the ambition to create some kind of strange, interactive experience. The ghost in the machine, it's almost always human. And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought. The solutions to all of these mysteries are grounded in really human things: creativity, pain, ambition, mischief. It really makes you wonder, for all the other unsolved mysteries that are still lurking out there in the deep corners of the web, what kind of human story is just waiting to be discovered? What do you think?